Hey, welcome back to the Zombie Tactics channel. Today talking about football and the Constitution. What does that mean? You've gone completely off the deep end, haven't you, Zombie Tactics? Maybe. But let me tell you what I'm talking about here. When I say football and the Constitution, it occurs to me that because most of my audience and most of my viewers are in the United States of America, that you're going to think I'm talking about something having to do with the game played with this. Because that's American football, right? But I also know that a good part of my audience, somewhere around 15 to 20%, is someplace else on the globe. And for that reason, I know that when I say football, you got this more in mind. So, depending upon where you are in the world, football is either that or that. Now, these aren't just two different balls. They're two different games played in a completely different way. Now, is that confusing? Well, it doesn't have to be confusing for more than a second. I mean, if I go to somewhere in South America, say Brazil, and somebody says they want to play football, why don't you bring the ball? And I show up with one of these in my hands, it's going to be a real chuckle for a second about the silly American who brought one of these to play a football game, because in Brazil, football is what we call soccer. But that confusion isn't going to last for a couple of seconds. It's the kind of thing that people can clarify really quickly and then get about the process of playing the game according to the rules of whatever game they happen to be playing. Similarly, if somebody was visiting from Brazil and I said, hey, we're going to get together a game of football over the weekend, why don't you show up at this and such field, and they showed up with, I don't know, a Brazilian national soccer team, or maybe they're a fan of Manchester United or something like that, and they show up in that kind of a jersey, everybody's going to have a little chuckle at their expense and say, no, we're really talking about this game here, and we're going to play some touch football or some flag football or maybe, tackle. And we'll all have a little chuckle and we'll laugh about the fact that that word can mean two different things depending upon what part of the world you come from. But it's no cause for great confusion. It's not something that we need to go, oh, it's a mystical, unknown property because this word could mean two different things to two different people. We'll never be able to know the true meaning of the word. We'll never be able to know if we're playing any of these games properly or not because it's all such a mystery to us. But that's exactly how some people act when they're talking about the Constitution. You can take a look at the Constitution, and even though it was written 200 years ago, you can determine what it meant. It would be no different if, say, 100, 200 years from now, the world is a very different place. Let's say the United States culture just, spreads out and dominates the planet, and as silly as it might sound, people aren't playing much of this game anymore, and football is almost always this. Well, if we were going to talk about history and talk about how, people used to play a game named football in some other country, we'd have to do a little research and find out that this is the game they're talking about. We'd have to look up the rules for that game, and it wouldn't be too much trouble to do that. It's not some great confusing thing, right? Same thing the other way around. Here we go again. Let's say the United States completely falls apart in an economic collapse or something, and this is the only game that people call, football anymore. We can still look up what those crazy Americans played with this ball. We can find the rules, and we know what their American football game was all about. It's not some great mystery. But people will take a look at the Constitution, and mostly, I think, somewhat corrupt judges, and that's the right way to look at it, I think, and they will take a look at the Constitution and say, well, this was obviously written 200 years ago, and some of the language is difficult, and we really can't tell what they meant. And so we have to interpret the Constitution according to the values of our times and try to take a look at the enduring principles and values in the Constitution and apply them in a pragmatic manner to the common era. That'd be exactly the position of somebody like a Stephen Breyer, who currently sits on the U.S. Supreme Court. The problem with that is that's a nonsense argument. Sure, the Constitution was written 200 years ago. Sure, in some ways they used language a little differently than we did. Some of the phraseology that they use is not as familiar to us as it would have been to someone, 200 some odd years ago. Some of the actual words they use have different meanings today than they had then. But there's no problem determining the actual meaning of the Constitution as written by the people who wrote it. You can go into any library, and I submit to you that any person with even average intelligence and reading comprehension in the English language can be shown very clearly what these documents meant, what the words meant, and any areas that there are some inconsistencies or some fuzziness about what something actually meant, you can determine what those words meant at the time, either by studying the document itself, the Constitution, and then learning a little bit about the language and idiom of the time, or by actually going to the very words that the people themselves wrote. Like, they explained why they were writing such a part of the Constitution in such a way. They explained what they meant. They explained what they intended it to mean, and there doesn't have to be any doubt about that. Now, for that reason, I'm sick and tired of people playing football with the Constitution, and I'm sick of hearing this argument about, well, the Constitution's a living document. It was written 200 years ago, and we obviously can't know what it meant, and it obviously can't apply today. That's a stupid argument, and it's one that I'm tired of hearing, and I hope you're tired of hearing it too. Now, what do you got to do to combat that? Well, the first thing is you in your own mind have to know that that's the game being played with you. They're pretending that somehow the Constitution is this great mystery document that you can't know anything about it. Spend some time on your own studying the Constitution. It's not that hard. I'll tell you, you don't have to be a rocket surgeon to understand this stuff. Study the document. Get some good material on it. Check out the thing they're doing at Hillsdale College right now. I'll try to put a link to that. They're going through the Constitution, and they'll explain it to you all. They'll just lay it right out for you, what it meant to the people who wrote it and what it ought to mean today. And they'll do so in plain language that anybody can understand. And then what you have to do is you have to stop putting up with politicians who appoint these kinds of either corrupt or stupid or evil judges. And that's one of the ways we're going to take back our republic, is by stop playing games with the Constitution. That's Zombie Tactics for today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.